In Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson, illustrated by Dora. Chapter 23. What Did You Expect? My grandmother was a firm believer in prayer. She assured me that God always answered when we prayed in faith. Sometimes he said, "No, not now," or "Wait patiently." And sometimes he said, "Yes," immediately. I never tired of hearing Grandma's stories about her answers to prayer. "Grandma, tell me about the time Grandpa needed shoes." Grandma would settle back in her chair, rest her crocheting in her lap, and we would go back together to a little farm in northern Michigan. Well, Grandpa and I had moved to the farm. All week he worked hard to make a living for us. Your mother was just a little girl then, and your uncle just a baby. On Sundays, Grandpa preached in the little church at the Corners. None of the people who came had any more money than we did, but they were generous with chickens and fruit and vegetables. We always had lots to eat. But finally the day came when Grandpa said, "Mabel, I just can't get up in the pulpit again with these shoes. My toes are coming out, and I'm afraid to move for fear someone will see them." It was true. His toes were coming out, and his mended socks could be seen taking the air. "Well," I said, "we have no money for shoes and nothing to sell to get any. We'll have to ask the Lord for them." Grandpa did not believe that we should ever ask the Lord for something we could provide if we set our mind to it. But shoes did seem to be out of the question, so we began praying for a new pair of shoes. I am sure Grandpa thought about those shoes several times during the week, but he never mentioned them again. He went about his work on the farm confident that the Lord would provide what was needful. On Saturday morning, a buggy came up our lane and Grandpa went out to meet it. It was one of our members with the chicken for Sunday dinner. After chatting for a while, the visitor said, "Oh, by the way, Brother Williams, I bought a pair of shoes last week and they just don't feel right on me. I wonder if you might be able to wear them." Grandpa beamed and answered, "Yes, sir, I certainly can." The visitor was surprised. "Why, how do you know?" he asked. "You haven't tried them on yet." I would wiggle in anticipation, for Grandpa's answer was the best part of the story. "I'm not worried about that," replied Grandpa. "When the Lord sends me shoes, he sends me the right size." Grandma would chuckle and resume her crocheting. "That's the way the Lord treats his children, you know," she would say. While Grandma's stories thrilled me and I had a healthy respect for her prayers, it was not until I was 9 years old that I was privileged to witness an answer that convinced me that God did indeed listen when Grandma spoke. We'd been making jelly this morning, and the sun shone through the filled glasses on the table. The paraffin to pour on top was heating slowly on the stove. Suddenly, a small spark touched the paraffin and it blazed up, igniting the wall behind the stove. Quickly, the fire spread to the ceiling. Terror-stricken, I began to run toward the door. I shall never forget Grandma as she stood with the wooden spoon in her hand and looked up to the ceiling. "Lord, please put that out," she said. And he did. That very moment, not a spark was left. Had it not been for the blackened wall and ceiling, I might have dreamed it. I stood wide-eyed and open-mouthed as Grandma began calmly to clean up the mess. "Well, child, what did you expect?" she asked when she discovered that I still stood speechless in the doorway. "Did you think the Lord would let the house burn down around our ears?" What had I expected? I will have to admit that had there been time to think about it, I would not have expected a miracle. Oh yes, I knew God performed miracles. I was brought up on those stories. But for me, that was too much to presume. My first reaction had been to call a neighbor, not God. Have you seen any miracles lately? You've never seen one? There is only one reason for that. You haven't asked. God doesn't reserve miracles for grandmas or preachers or people who have had a lot of experience in praying. He has them ready for any of his children who call for one. Remember, though, a miracle is not something you could do for yourself. It is an impossible in your life. It is a spot with no out. It is for the place where your only foreseeable future is disaster. This is the time to put in an urgent request for a miracle. And this is a time, as surely as you are God's child, that you will see one. Well, what did you expect? That's the way the Lord treats his children, you know. End of chapter 23. End of In Grandma's Attic.